The cold wind howled through the streets of Los Angeles, rattling empty soda cans and newspapers across the cracked pavement. Streetlights flickered dimly, casting weak glows over sleeping figures huddled in the corners of alleyways. Among them was a young girl, no older than 14, curled up in a tattered sleeping bag beside a shut-down convenience store. Her name was Lily. Lily had been homeless for nearly a year now. The city, once a beacon of dreams, had become a cruel, unforgiving place for a girl with nowhere to go. Her mother had passed away from an overdose when Lily was 10, and her father, if he was still alive, had vanished long before she could remember his face. Foster homes had come and gone, but nothing felt like home. So the streets became her world. She was hungry, not just the kind of hunger that gnawed at her belly, but the kind that made her bones feel hollow. She hadn't eaten since the morning before when a kind cafe owner had given her a stale muffin. But food was not what haunted her mind that night. Lily clutched a crumpled photo in her trembling hands. It was of her mother, taken long ago when things were different. The woman in the picture had bright eyes, a warm smile, and her arms wrapped around a much younger Lily. A single question burned in Lily's heart as she stared at the picture, one she had asked herself 1,000 times before. "Where are you now, Mama?" she whispered. Tears blurred her vision as she tucked the photo into her worn-out jacket. She looked up at the sky, past the pollution and city lights, trying to see the stars. Her mother used to tell her about Jesus, about how he watched over people and loved them no matter what. "But if he loves me, why did he let me end up here?" she muttered, bitterness creeping into her voice. Her fingers tightened around a small cross necklace she had found in a donation box months ago. She didn't know if it had any power, but holding it made her feel less alone. Lily sighed, curling deeper into her sleeping bag. Just as her tired eyes began to close, she heard footsteps approaching. Not just anyone's footsteps. They were steady, confident, but not hurried, not aggressive. She felt a presence, something calm and warm, standing near her. She hesitated before looking up, and that was when she saw him. Lily blinked against the harsh glow of a street lamp, her eyes adjusting to the figure standing before her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a simple black jacket over a dark t-shirt. His rugged face bore lines of wisdom, his piercing blue eyes filled with something she rarely saw in people, kindness. She recognized him instantly. "Why, you're that actor," she stammered, pushing herself up slightly. The man crouched down to her level, a soft smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Yeah? Which one?" he asked, his voice deep and warm. She hesitated. "Mel Gibson," she finally whispered. A chuckle rumbled from his chest. "Guilty as charged." Lily's mind raced. She had seen his movies before, at least back when she had a home. Her mother had loved Braveheart. But more than that, she remembered something else about him. Something about faith. "What are you doing out here?" she asked cautiously. Mel leaned back, resting his arms on his knees. "Just walking. Thinking." He paused, studying her with gentle curiosity. "And what about you, kid?" Lily dropped her gaze, embarrassed. I live here." A flicker of sadness crossed his face, but he didn't look at her with pity. Instead, there was understanding. "That's tough," he said simply. "How long?" She shrugged. "Almost a year." Mel sighed, shaking his head. "That's a long time to be alone." Lily bit her lip, her fingers playing with the frayed edges of her jacket. The conversation felt unreal. She was sitting on the street, talking to a famous actor, yet it felt natural, like she was talking to someone who actually cared. A long silence stretched between them before she finally asked the question that had been burning inside her for months. Do you believe in Jesus?" Mel's eyes locked onto hers. There was no hesitation in his response. "With all my heart." Lily swallowed. "Then tell me, why does he let people like me suffer?" For the first time, Mel looked away, staring down at his hands. It was a question he had wrestled with himself many times. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable emotion behind it. "I won't pretend to have all the answers," he admitted. But I do know this. Jesus doesn't promise us a life without pain. He walked through suffering himself. Lily frowned. Then why does he let bad things happen? Mel inhaled deeply. Because he gives us free will. People make choices, some good, some terrible. And sometimes we suffer because of the choices of others. But that doesn't mean he's abandoned us. Lily scoffed. Then where is he now? Mel looked her straight in the eye, his voice firm yet filled with compassion. He's right here, Lily. Lily froze. She hadn't told him her name. A shiver ran down her spine, but not from the cold. Something stirred deep within her. Something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Mel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn rosary. He placed it gently in her hands. This was my mother's, he said. She gave it to me when I was lost. I want you to have it. Lily stared at the rosary, her fingers tracing over the smooth beads. Tears welled in her eyes. Why are you being nice to me? She whispered. Mel smiled. Because that's what Jesus would do. Lily couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears fell freely as she clutched the rosary to her chest. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Lily wiped her tears with the sleeve of her jacket, her small fingers still clinging to the rosary Mel had given her. She had never owned anything so precious before, at least not since she lost her mother. Mel stood up slowly, stretching his legs before glancing down at her. Tell me something, Lily. When was the last time you had a real meal? She hesitated. Lying wouldn't do her any good, and for some reason, she felt safe being honest with him. Yesterday morning, she admitted. A cafe owner gave me a muffin. Mel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. That's not a meal. Come on, kid. Let's get you something warm to eat. Lily's eyes widened. You don't have to do that. I know, he said with a grin. But I want to. A part of her hesitated. She had learned the hard way that kindness often came with conditions. But looking into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: sincerity. Okay, she said softly. Mel led the way, and Lily followed, feeling both excited and nervous. She had never walked beside a celebrity before, let alone one who was treating her like she mattered. As they strolled down the dimly lit sidewalk, people occasionally glanced in their direction. Some recognized Mel and whispered, but he paid no attention. After a few blocks, they arrived at a small diner that was still open late into the night. The warm glow of the neon sign reading Annie's Diner felt like a beacon in the darkness. Mel held the door open for Lily, and as she stepped inside, the smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon wrapped around her like a comforting hug. A friendly waitress with graying hair and tired eyes looked up and did a double take when she saw Mel Gibson walk in. Her eyes widened. Well, I'll be darned. Mel gave her a sheepish grin. Hey, Annie. The woman shook her head, laughing. What are you doing in my little diner at this hour? Just grabbing a meal with my friend here, he said, nodding toward Lily. Lily shifted uncomfortably under Annie's gaze, afraid of being judged for her worn-out clothes and unwashed hair. But instead, Annie's expression softened. Well, any friend of yours is welcome here, she said warmly. Have a seat, and I'll bring you something hot. They slid into a booth, and Lily ran her fingers over the smooth table, still trying to process what was happening. She wasn't used to sitting in places like this anymore. When Annie returned, she placed a steaming plate of food in front of Lily. A cheeseburger, crispy fries, and a large cup of hot chocolate with whipped cream. Lily's stomach twisted in hunger, and she hesitated only for a second before digging in. The first bite of the burger sent warmth flooding through her body, and she let out an involuntary hum of satisfaction. Mel chuckled. Good, huh? She nodded furiously, too busy chewing to respond. For a while, they ate in silence, but then Lily put her burger down and looked at Mel. The question was still there, lingering in her mind. You really believe he's with us? She asked, her voice quieter now, less skeptical. Mel nodded. I do. But why me? She whispered. Why would Jesus care about some homeless girl no one else cares about? Mel leaned forward, his blue eyes serious yet filled with warmth. "Lily, do you know the story of the lost sheep?" She shook her head. "It's in the Bible," he explained. Jesus told a story about a shepherd who had 100 sheep. One got lost, and instead of staying with the 99, the shepherd went out looking for that one. He didn't stop until he found it. And when he did, he rejoiced. Lily swallowed hard. "That's how much he loves you," Mel continued. "You may feel lost, but he's still looking for you. And he's never going to stop." A lump formed in Lily's throat. She had never thought of it that way. Mel smiled. "And you know what? Maybe tonight was no accident. Maybe he wanted you to hear this." Lily glanced down at the rosary, then back at the man sitting across from her. Maybe, just maybe, he was right. Lily sat there, staring at the rosary in her hands, her mind swirling with emotions she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Could it really be true? Could Jesus have been watching over her all this time, even when she felt completely abandoned? She took another sip of her hot chocolate, letting its warmth spread through her chest, and looked up at Mel. He was waiting patiently, not pushing her to speak, just giving her space. That was new. Most people either ignored her or talked at her without really listening. Finally, she exhaled shakily. "If Jesus is looking for me, like you said, then why did he let my mom die?" Mel's expression softened, the lines on his face deepening as he nodded slowly. "That's a tough one, Lily, and I won't pretend to know exactly why things happen the way they do." He leaned back against the booth. "But I do know this, God doesn't cause pain. This world is broken, full of people who make choices, some of them terrible. And sometimes, good people get caught in the storm." Lily looked down at her lap, gripping the edge of her jacket. She was trying to get better. She really was. But one night she didn't wake up. The paramedics said it was an overdose. Her voice trembled. "She promised me she wouldn't use again." Mel sighed deeply. "I'm so sorry, Lily." She swallowed hard, forcing back tears. "She used to tell me about Jesus too. She said he was always with us. But after she died, I stopped believing." Mel nodded. "I get it." Lily furrowed her brow. "You do." A shadow passed over his face. "Yeah, I've been through my own dark times. There was a point in my life when I felt completely lost. I made mistakes, bad ones. Hurt people I cared about." He looked down at his hands as if remembering something painful. "I hit rock bottom. I thought God had given up on me." Lily was quiet, watching him closely. She had never thought about someone like Mel Gibson, someone rich, famous, feeling the way she did. "What changed?" she asked. Mel took a deep breath. "I realized that no matter how far I had fallen, God was still there, waiting. He didn't stop loving me, even when I stopped believing in him. And when I finally reached out, he was there to pull me back." Lily bit her lip, his words sinking deep into her heart. "But how do you know he's real?" Mel's gaze locked onto hers, unwavering. "Because I've felt him. Not in some big, flashy miracle, just in the quiet moments. The moments when I should have been done for, but somehow I wasn't. The moments when I thought I was alone, but I wasn't." He nodded toward her. "Like right now." Lily stared at him, her chest tightening. Could this really be one of those moments? Could God have sent her someone like this, to remind her that she wasn't alone? The thought made her heart ache. She wanted to believe. She really did. But could she? She clenched the rosary in her hand and whispered, "I don't know how to believe anymore." Mel smiled softly. "That's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to take one step." Lily hesitated, looking down at the cross on the rosary. Maybe she could take one step. Maybe she wasn't as lost as she thought. Lily turned the rosary over in her fingers, the tiny cross pressing into her palm. It felt warm, almost as if it carried a piece of something bigger, something she couldn't quite understand. Mel watched her in silence, giving her the space to process everything. The quiet hum of the diner, the clinking of plates from the kitchen, and the soft murmur of late-night customers filled the background. But in that moment, It felt like the whole world had narrowed down to just the two of them. Finally, she let out a slow breath. How do you take that first step? Mel smiled gently. You start by talking to him. Lily frowned. Like, praying? Yeah, Mel nodded. But it doesn't have to be fancy. You don't need big words or memorized lines. Just be honest. He already knows what's in your heart. Talking to God is like talking to a friend. Lily swallowed. But I don't even know what to say. Mel leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Then start with what's real. Tell him what you're feeling. Even if it's anger, sadness, or doubt, he can handle it. He just wants you to come to him. Lily hesitated, the weight of his words pressing on her chest. It had been a long time since she had prayed. The last time she had tried, she was sitting on her bed in foster care, clutching her mother's old sweater, begging God to bring her back. And he hadn't. But now she wasn't sure what she believed anymore. She looked down at her plate, poking at the remaining fries. I don't know if I can do that, she admitted quietly. Mel didn't push. He simply nodded as if he understood completely. That's okay. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask the questions. Lily's throat tightened. And what if I never get the answers? Mel's expression was thoughtful. Then you keep searching. Keep asking. Because sometimes, the journey itself is what leads us closer to the truth. Lily didn't know what to say to that. But deep down, something inside her shifted. Just a little. She wasn't ready to pray. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely closed off to the idea anymore. Mel glanced at the clock on the diner wall. It's late, he said. You got somewhere safe to go? Lily stiffened, her shoulders hunching slightly. I usually sleep in the alley near the old bookstore, she muttered. Mel's jaw tightened. That's not safe. She shrugged. It's all I got. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. There's gotta be a better option. Lily lowered her gaze. There isn't. Mel studied her for a moment, then pulled out his phone. All right, he said. Then let's find one. Lily's eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean, there's got to be a shelter nearby. A good one. He started scrolling through his phone. We'll find somewhere safe for you tonight. Lily's heart pounded. No one had ever done this for her before. Most people just looked away, pretended she didn't exist. But here was this man, this famous actor, treating her like she mattered. She didn't know what to do with that. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible anymore. Mel scrolled through his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lily sat across from him, gripping the edge of the table, torn between hope and fear. She had been on her own for so long. Could she really trust that someone wanted to help her? After a few moments, Mel's face lit up. Here, he said, turning his phone toward her. It's called St. Jude's Shelter for Youth. It's run by a group of volunteers, and from what I've heard, they actually care about the kids they help. Lily swallowed hard, staring at the screen. It looked nice, too nice. Warm beds, smiling volunteers, kids who didn't seem completely broken by the world. Felt unreal. Mel must have sensed her hesitation because he leaned forward, his voice softer. Look, I know trusting people isn't easy, and I won't force you to go. But I do think you deserve better than a cold alleyway. Lily bit her lip, her fingers tightening around the rosary in her palm. A part of her wanted to run back to what was familiar, to the streets she knew, even if they were dangerous. But another part of her, one she hadn't listened to in a long time, whispered that maybe this was the answer she had been searching for. Do you think they'll even take me? She asked hesitantly. Mel smiled. Kid, if they don't, I'll make sure they do. A small laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. Felt strange. Laughing. But it also felt good. Mel pulled out his wallet and placed a few bills on the table for the meal. Then he stood up, offering his hand to her. Come on. Let's go see if we can get you a bed for the night. Lily hesitated for only a second before she reached out and took his hand. His grip was strong, steady, safe. And as they stepped out into the cold night, for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel alone. The streets of Los Angeles felt different as Lily walked beside Mel. Usually, she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with strangers, always bracing herself for the worst. But now, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't walking alone. They didn't talk much as they walked. The city was alive even at this late hour. Cars sped by, neon signs flickered, and laughter echoed from bars and restaurants. But none of it seemed to touch Lily. Right now, all she could focus on was the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Would the shelter really take her in? What if they turned her away? She glanced up at Mel, who seemed completely calm. He walked with purpose, as if he had no doubt that everything would work out. "How do you do that?" she asked suddenly. Mel looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Act like everything's gonna be okay." He chuckled softly. "I don't always think that way, but I've learned that fear likes to lie to us. Tells us we're alone, that there's no way out, that we're too far gone." He glanced at her, his expression serious. "But it's not true." Lily looked away, her fingers tightening around the rosary. What if I'm too broken?" she whispered. Mel stopped walking. Lily took a few more steps before realizing he wasn't beside her anymore. She turned around, confused. Mel was looking at her, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You ever heard of a kintsugi bowl?" Lily frowned. "A what?" "Kintsugi. It's a Japanese art form. When a bowl or a vase breaks, instead of throwing it away, they repair it with gold. They don't try to hide the cracks. They make them part of the design. And in the end, the broken piece is even more beautiful than before." Lily blinked. "What does that have to do with me?" Mel smiled. "Because you're not too broken, Lily. You're just in the middle of your story. And trust me, the best parts are still coming." She swallowed hard, his words hitting something deep inside her. She had spent so long believing she was shattered beyond repair. But what if the cracks were just part of something bigger? Something beautiful? Before she could say anything, Mel nodded toward a building up ahead. "That's it," he said. Lily followed his gaze. The shelter wasn't huge, but it looked warm. The front porch light was on, and there was a sign that read. Her heart pounded. Was this really happening? Mel smiled at her. "You ready?" Lily took a deep breath. She wasn't sure, but maybe it was time to find out. And so, gripping the rosary tightly in her hand, she stepped forward into the unknown. Lily's heart pounded as she stepped toward the entrance of St. Jude's Shelter for Youth. The building wasn't anything grand, just a two-story brick structure with a well-worn wooden door, but it felt impossibly far away, as if the simple act of walking inside would change everything. She hesitated. Mel noticed. He didn't rush her. Instead, he simply stood beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "It's okay to be scared," he said gently. "But fear doesn't get the final say." Lily swallowed hard, forcing herself to move forward. When they reached the door, Mel gave it a firm knock. A few moments later, it creaked open. A woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and short, curly brown hair stood in the doorway. She wore a blue sweater and jeans, and the warmth in her expression reminded Lily of something she had lost long ago. "Good evening," she greeted them, her gaze shifting from Mel to Lily. "I'm Claire. Can I help you?" Mel spoke before Lily could. "Hey, Claire. My name's Mel, and this is my friend Lily. She's been on the streets for a while, and we were hoping you might have a place for her tonight." Claire's expression softened as she looked at Lily. She didn't ask 100 questions. She didn't look at Lily with pity or judgment, just quiet understanding. "We always have room for one more," she said gently. Lily's breath caught in her throat. This was real. She had spent so much time assuming that no one would ever take her in, that no one cared. And yet, here was this woman, this total stranger, welcoming her without hesitation. Claire stepped aside, motioning toward the warm, softly lit hallway behind her. "Come on in, sweetheart." Lily's feet felt like they were made of lead. Could she really do this? Could she really walk into something good without the fear of it being ripped away? She looked up at Mel. His smile was small but full of encouragement. "Go on, kid," he said. "You got this." Lily hesitated for only a second longer before. Finally, she took a step forward. And then another. And before she knew it, she was inside. The warmth of the shelter hit her immediately. The scent of fresh laundry and something cooking in the kitchen filled the air. A couple of kids her age were sitting on a couch, laughing softly as they played cards. A bulletin board covered in colorful notes and drawings hung on the wall. It didn't feel like an institution. Felt like a home. Claire closed the door gently behind her. "You hungry?" Lily nodded, even though she had already eaten. Claire smiled. "I just made some soup. Why don't you sit for a bit, and we'll talk?" Lily's fingers unconsciously tightened around the rosary in her pocket. For so long, she had told herself that hope was dangerous, that it was a lie. But as she followed Claire into the shelter, she realized something. Hope wasn't a lie. It was a choice. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to choose it. Mel didn't follow Lily inside. He stood at the doorway, watching as Claire led her toward a cozy dining area where a steaming bowl of soup awaited. His heart swelled with quiet gratitude. He had seen a lot in his life. Fame, fortune, failures. He had been at the top of the world and at rock bottom. But moments like this, moments where he could be a small part of something bigger than himself, meant more than any award ever could. Claire turned back and gave him a knowing smile. "You did a good thing tonight." Mel shook his head. "She did the hard part." Claire nodded. "Still, thank you for bringing her here. We'll take good care of her." Mel had no doubt about that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small slip of paper. "If she ever needs anything, let her know she can call me." He handed it to Claire. The woman took it with a smile. "I will." Mel took one last look at Lily. She was sitting at the table now, her shoulders still tense. But there was something different in her posture. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was stepping into something new. With a satisfied nod, Mel turned and stepped back out into the cool night air. As he walked away, he whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for leading me to her." And somewhere in the depths of her heart, Lily whispered back, "Thank you for leading him to me." The first night at St. Jude's shelter was the best sleep Lily had gotten in years. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't curled up on cold concrete. She wasn't listening for footsteps, waiting for someone to steal her few belongings. She wasn't afraid. Instead, she was wrapped in a warm blanket, lying on a real bed. For the first time in forever, she felt safe. When she woke up, morning sunlight streamed through the window, painting the walls in soft gold. For a moment, she forgot where she was. And then it all came back. The diner, Mel, the walk to the shelter, Claire's kindness. She sat up slowly, reaching into her pocket and pulling out the rosary. Turning it over in her fingers, she whispered, "If you're really there, if you really care." She swallowed hard. "Then maybe, just maybe, I'm willing to listen." It wasn't much, but it was a start. And sometimes the smallest step was all it took to begin again. Lily sat on the edge of the small bed, the warmth of the blanket still wrapped around her. The morning light creeping through the window painted everything in a soft glow, but she still felt the weight of something heavier, her past. Even though last night felt like a turning point, a part of her still whispered that she didn't belong here, that she was still just a street kid, a lost cause. She stared at the rosary in her hands, tracing the delicate beads with her fingers. It was strange, before last night, she had only seen faith as something distant, something that belonged to people with better lives, people who hadn't been abandoned by the world. But Mel's words stuck with her. "You're not too broken. You're just in the middle of your story." A gentle knock on the door made her jump. Claire peeked her head in, offering a warm smile. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, better than I have in a long time." Claire stepped inside, carrying a folded set of fresh clothes. "I figured you might like a warm shower and some clean clothes, Breakfast is in about 30 minutes. Lily hesitated before reaching out to take the clothes. Thank you. Claire nodded but didn't leave just yet. She studied Lily for a moment, as if sensing the battle waging inside her. I know this is a big change for you, she said gently, but you don't have to figure everything out at once. Just take it one step at a time. Lily looked down at the clothes in her hands. One step at a time. She wasn't sure what the future held. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't afraid to find out anymore. The warm water of the shower felt almost surreal against Lily's skin. She had grown so used to washing up in gas station sinks or public restrooms that the feeling of hot water cascading down her back felt like a luxury she didn't deserve. She let herself stand there for a long time, breathing in the steam, letting it cleanse not just her body, but something deeper. When she finally stepped out and dressed in the fresh clothes Claire had given her, jeans and a soft sweater, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked normal, not like a homeless girl, not like someone people would cross the street to avoid, just a girl. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't wearing the weight of her past like a badge for the world to see. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the bathroom and followed the scent of food toward the dining area. The shelter was alive now. Kids talking, the clatter of plates, laughter drifting through the air. It was nothing like the places she had stayed before, the ones that felt more like cold, sterile holding cells than places of safety. She spotted Claire near the kitchen, helping one of the younger kids carry a plate to the table. When Claire turned and saw Lily, she smiled warmly. Come on in, sweetheart. We've got pancakes and eggs this morning. Lily hesitated, then slowly walked toward an empty seat. She had spent so long running. But for the first time, she was beginning to wonder, maybe she didn't have to run anymore. After breakfast, Lily found herself sitting by the front window, staring out at the street. The city was still moving at its usual chaotic pace. Cars honking, people rushing. But for the first time, she felt like she was on the outside of that world, looking in. She wasn't sure what came next. She didn't even know if she was supposed to stay here. But before she could get too lost in her thoughts, Claire approached with a small phone in her hand. Someone wants to talk to you, she said, holding it out. Lily frowned. Me? Claire nodded. It's Mel. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She hesitated, then took the phone, pressing it to her ear. Hello. Hey, kid, came the familiar warm voice. How's your first morning at St. Jude's? Lily swallowed. It's different. Mel chuckled. That's not a bad thing. She bit her lip. I don't know what happens now. Mel was quiet for a moment before speaking. That's the beauty of it, Lily. You get to decide. You're not stuck anymore. You've got a place where people care about you. And if you ever need anything, you can call me. Lily gripped the phone tighter. Why are you doing this? Mel sighed. Because someone once reminded me that when we have the chance to help someone, we should. I believe God put us in each other's path for a reason. Lily didn't know what to say to that. But for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, God had been listening all along. Lily sat with the phone pressed to her ear, her fingers tracing the edge of the receiver as Mel's words echoed in her mind. I believe God put us in each other's path for a reason. She wasn't used to hearing things like that. People didn't just help her. They didn't just show up and stay. She had learned the hard way that trusting people often led to heartbreak. But Mel, he was different. He had no reason to care about her, yet he did. She took a deep breath. You really mean that? She asked softly. Every word, Mel said. You're not alone anymore, Lily. And you never really were. Lily swallowed hard, staring down at her lap. She wasn't sure she believed that yet. But maybe she wanted to. I should probably let you go, she said, her voice quieter. All right, Mel said. But remember what I said. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me. Lily nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Okay. Take care, kid. The line went dead. Lily sat there for a long moment, still holding the phone. She wasn't sure what was happening inside her, but something was changing. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had someone in her corner. Lily wasn't sure what made her do it. Maybe it was the quiet of the shelter late at night. Maybe it was the way Claire always smiled at her like she wasn't just another lost kid. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to fight just to survive. But that night, as she lay in bed, she pulled the rosary from her pocket and whispered, "Hey, God." Her voice was shaky, hesitant, but she kept going. "I don't know if you're listening, or if you even care." She took a deep breath. "But, if you are, then maybe I'd like to believe again." Silence filled the room. No big miracle happened. No voice from heaven. But for the first time, Lily didn't feel quite so alone. And maybe that was enough. Lily lay awake long after her whispered prayer, staring at the ceiling of her small but comfortable room at St. Jude's. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Maybe some sign, some undeniable proof that God had heard her. But instead, all she felt was a strange sense of peace. It was subtle, nothing earth-shattering. Just a quiet, warm feeling in her chest. For the first time in years, she didn't fall asleep afraid. The next morning, she woke up to the smell of bacon and eggs drifting down the hallway. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, she sat up and ran a hand through her hair. It had been a long time since she'd woken up somewhere safe 2 days in a row. She got dressed, slipping the rosary into her pocket before heading to breakfast. The dining area was filled with kids talking, eating, and laughing. It was strange, seeing so much life in one place. Claire was standing by the kitchen, pouring a cup of coffee when she spotted Lily. "Morning, sweetheart," she said with a smile. "Sleep okay?" Lily nodded. Yeah. Claire's smile widened. "That's good to hear. Come grab some food before the boys eat everything." Lily smirked a little and made her way to the buffet-style counter, grabbing a plate. As she sat down to eat, she noticed something. She wasn't keeping her head down anymore. She wasn't shrinking into herself, trying to disappear. For the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she belonged. Later that afternoon, Claire found Lily sitting outside on the shelter's front steps, absent-mindedly tracing the edges of the rosary. "You've been quiet today," Claire noted, sitting beside her. Lily shrugged. "Just thinking." Claire nodded, letting the silence settle for a moment before reaching into her pocket and pulling out a small folded piece of paper. "This came for you." Lily blinked, surprised. "For me?" Claire handed it to her. "It's from Mel." Lily's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter. "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I hope St. Jude's is taking good care of you. I meant what I said, you're not alone. You've got people in your corner now. And if you ever need a reminder of that, just look at that rosary in your pocket. Remember what I told you. God hasn't forgotten about you, and neither have I. Take care, kid." Lily swallowed the lump in her throat, her eyes lingering on the words. She wasn't used to people keeping their promises. But maybe this time was different. Maybe she wasn't alone after all. Facing the future days turned into weeks, and slowly, Lily found herself settling into life at St. Jude's. It wasn't always easy. Some nights, the old fears crept back in. Sometimes, she still wondered if this was all temporary, if one day she'd wake up and be back on the streets. But then there were moments, small, quiet moments, that reminded her she was safe, like the way Claire always had time to listen, or how the other kids treated her like she belonged, or the simple fact that every night she had a warm bed to sleep in. She was still figuring things out. She wasn't sure what came next. But one thing she did know, she wasn't the same girl who had sat alone on the streets, convinced no one cared. She had been found. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to start believing again. The road ahead one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Lily sat by the shelter's window, holding a pen and a piece of paper. She hesitated for a moment before writing, "Hey Mel, I don't know if I'll ever be able to say this out loud, so I'm writing it instead. Thank you, not just for the food that night, not just for walking me to St. Jude's. Thank you for seeing me, for reminding me that I'm not forgotten. I don't know what comes next, but I think I'm ready to try. You were right. I'm not too broken. I'm just in the middle of my story. And maybe, just maybe, it's going to be a good one. Lily. She folded the letter carefully, staring at it for a moment before slipping it into an envelope. Tomorrow she'd ask Claire to send it. For now, she simply sat there, looking up at the sky, feeling something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. And for the first time, she believed it was real.